So welcome back, everybody, and I hope everyone had the chance to grab a coffee, and good to have everyone back here for the last session of today. Just before I pass over to Jonathan, our moderator for the session, a couple of very quick announcements. So first of all, I've been asked a few times by people whether the presentations that have been made today are available for you all to view. Absolutely. So all of those presentations and recordings from all of the sessions are available for you all to view. So you will receive an email at the end of the day today with a link to enable you to do that. But also, if you look at your badges, you have a QR code and also a link at the bottom of your badges. And that is the link that will enable you to visit the area that has all the conference proceedings, and you can view the main program, all the presentations, all of the recordings and everything via that link there. So, but you will receive an email towards the end of the day today as well. And finally, just to remind everyone that after this session, we do have a cocktail reception for those of you joining us here in person. So the cocktail reception will be happening down one floor. And we're going to have drinks and canapes, and I hope you're all able to stay and join us for that. It's going to be hosted by Broadcast Network Europe. And as I said, hope you're all very much able to stay and continue the discussions over a few drinks later on today. That said, we're on to our last session then. So the final session of the day is looking at an issue that has been, as I said before, been raised in a number of the different sessions that have taken place, and that's that of the 6 gigahertz band. So obviously one of the hottest topics around at the moment. So really looking forward to this discussion. So to introduce our speakers and to tell us more, I'd like to now pass over to Jonathan Wall from Ether, who's going to be moderating the session. Jonathan, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Dan. I guess everyone can hear me okay? Great. So I'm Jonathan Wall. I'm a manager at Ether Consulting. For those of you who don't know us, we're a telecommunications specialist strategy consulting firm. We do a lot of work in the area of spectrum, which is why you're seeing me here today. So moving on, we're doing a panel session on the 6 gigahertz band this afternoon to finish off the day. We've touched on some of the issues on that topic already in the earlier sessions, and I'm sure we'll have a good debate today too. We're going to split this session up into 2 parts. The first part is going to be 2 presentations from stakeholders on either side of the debate, setting out their case for the 6 gigahertz. And then we'll move to a panel discussion, which should hopefully have the chance to take in plenty of questions from the audience as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Calvin Bahia from GSMA Intelligence to talk about his perspective on the 6 gigahertz. Calvin.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, for the introduction, and thank you, Forum Global and all the hosts for letting me present today. I'm bitterly disappointed I can't be there in Cape Town, especially because it hasn't stopped raining in London here, but hopefully next year. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes talking through the results of a study we published a few months ago, looking at the socio-economic benefits of different policy options for the 6 gigahertz band. So if we can go to the next slide, please. By way of quick introduction, I won't spend too much time, but my name's Calvin Bahia, and I'm a principal economist in the GSMA Intelligence team. The purpose of this study, as Jonathan set out, there's a lot of debate at the moment going on around the most appropriate assignment option for the 6 gigahertz band. So to try and help inform the debate, and especially to assist policymakers in making their decision, we did a cost-benefit analysis looking at the costs and benefits of different assignment options. You can see there the 3 scenarios we did. So starting from a baseline where it's not assigned for either licensed or unlicensed, we looked at a scenario where the full band was available for license use, scenario 2, which is a fully unlicensed approach, and scenario 3, where there's a lower part of the band for unlicensed and upper part for licensed. Obviously, countries have already made this decision. So we know in the US, for example, they've already gone with scenario 2. We know some countries have already signed the lower part of the band, but haven't decided on the upper part of the band. So for the purposes of this study, though, we looked at all 3. We looked at 24 countries, which I'll come on to next, and the analysis covers a 15-year period up to 2035. Next slide, please. So this just gives you an overview of the state of broadband in the 24 markets we looked at. So we looked at some countries across a range of regions. Here, the red chart shows you, as of the end of 2021, the level of mobile broadband adoption based on connections. And then the other line is the level of fixed broadband adoption, split between cable and fiber to the home and lower speed. And you can see the number of the countries there were quite wide ranging. I've highlighted there that the 4 African countries we looked at. The key thing to note is that if you look at those countries, you've got relatively high levels of mobile broadband adoption and very limited levels of fixed broadband adoption. Whereas in some of the other countries we looked at, Singapore, Qatar, and UAE probably stand out. They've got very high levels of both fixed and mobile broadband adoption as well. Next slide, please. So I won't go through this in too much detail. There is a link to the report at the end. But in very general, I just wanted to quickly summarize the way in which we approached this was a supply and demand approach. So for both 5G and for Wi-Fi, we looked at the expected demand over time based on expected adoption, what the requirements are, taking into account things like traffic growth and Wi-Fi offload. So we forecast demand, and then alongside that, we forecast the amount of supply, which in the case of 5G is primarily based on number of sites, spectral efficiencies, and the spectrum available. And we constructed the supply based on different availability options for 6 gigahertz. So having all the band assigned, having the upper part, and having none. And then if there's a capacity constraint, we then link that either to an impact on quality of service or potentially an impact on network densification. So that was our overall approach. And if we come to the next slide, we did something very similar for Wi-Fi. So based on the basis that fixed broadband is the primary driver of Wi-Fi demand, we looked at the demand for fixed broadband, particularly fiber and cable, and then we compared that with the supply. So effectively, how much Wi-Fi capacity is available given existing spectrum. Next slide, please. Before getting to the results, I really wanted to highlight, I'd say, 4 key parameters or key factors that really influence the results at a country level. So these are, I guess, are the 4 things that we think are particularly important for regulators and policymakers to consider. So one is obviously that the driver of this spectrum will come from the adoption of connectivity. So how adoption of 5G and fixed broadband evolves will be a key driver in terms of understanding the demand for licensed and unlicensed use of spectrum. A second one is around fixed broadband speeds. So I live here in the UK, and if I get my fiber to the home service, I think currently my maximum speed available is still around 200 or 300 megabits per second. So in that case, the thing that's stopping me from getting me 1 gigabit isn't so much the Wi-Fi, it's the underlying connectivity, the underlying connection. Obviously, in a 15-year period, that will increase, but it's something that is worth bearing in mind. The third point is around the existing and planned spectrum availability, both for licensed and unlicensed. So particularly for 5G, we're seeing across countries different amounts of spectrum being assigned, especially in the mid-band. For unlicensed use as well, this is something that can vary. So understanding how much spectrum is currently and is expected to be available is really key. And then linked to this is the last point, which is around the utilization of high band spectrum. So in many countries, either have or going forward, they'll be assigning millimeter wave high band spectrum for 5G. In most of the countries we studied, there's also high band spectrum in the 57 to 71 gigahertz band available for unlicensed use or is expected to be available. So utilization of this will obviously impact the amount of demand in other bands as well. So these are 4 of the key things we considered or that we found that were quite important. And if we go to the next slide, this is we've got a range of results. So I'm going to focus on 2 here, but these were the economic impact results across our countries for 3 scenarios. So I appreciate there's a lot going on. So what this shows is for the 24 countries we looked at, based on the assumption that fiber and cable speeds will over the period reach up to 10 gigabits per second, and if we assume that the high bands are utilized for Wi-Fi, you can see the blue dots are the economic impacts for scenario 2, which is fully unlicensed. Red is the split band approach, so scenario 3, and the light green is a fully licensed approach, scenario 1. So in this particular scenario, we found that the fully licensed approach was generally the most beneficial option. In some countries, we found that the split band approach was the most beneficial as well. The key reason behind this is that across most countries, if the high band spectrum is utilized for Wi-Fi, that should address a large proportion of the demand, and allocating the additional 6 gigahertz shouldn't be needed to address any increase in demand. So that's one scenario. If we then go to the next slide. So this switches the assumption around the utilization of high bands for Wi-Fi, where we assume that they're not utilized. As we know, in many countries at the moment, they're not. In this case, we find generally there will be capacity constraints on both services. And in this case, for most countries, it's the split band approach, scenario 3, that's most beneficial. So that will address the capacity constraints for Wi-Fi and for 5G. I've highlighted there the countries that 4 countries we looked at in sub-Saharan Africa. In these countries, even under this assumption, we still find that scenario 1, so the fully licensed approach, drives the greatest benefit. And the main reason for this is, as we saw in one of the earlier slides, mobile adoption in these countries is relatively high and should increase going forward, whereas fixed broadband is extremely limited. So obviously that hasn't changed much in the past. If it stays that way going forward, then in that case, given most of the connectivity will be driven by mobile, then assigning the 6 gigahertz band to address capacity constraints for mobile use, for IoT use, will have the greatest benefit. So that was our finding there. If potentially we've been a little bit, if, for example, we get that wrong, and actually if it turns out that fixed broadband will increase much more than expected than it has done, it's perhaps quite instructive to look at the results for other countries, where even in countries with very high levels of fixed broadband adoption, for example, you can see there in Japan and Singapore and Qatar, even in those countries, we find that the most beneficial assignment is the split band approach. The reason being that any potential capacity constraint on Wi-Fi should be addressed by assigning the lower band, and then the upper band can address the constraints for the licensed approach for 5G. And then the last slide, I'm conscious, I think I'm almost out of time. So just to summarize the conclusion, so the optimal assignment policy we found really depends on the expected adoption of 5G and fixed broadband, the speeds for fixed broadband and the spectrum availability, both current and going forward. We found that in our markets, if speeds reach up to 10 gigabits per second, and if high bands are utilized for Wi-Fi, then fully licensing the 6 gigahertz should drive the greatest benefit. If high bands aren't utilized, then for most of our countries, then the splitting the band drives the highest benefit. But in the African countries we looked at, we found that the fully licensed approach still drives the greatest benefit. And then finally, last slide, or next slide, please. Just to say thank you very much. If you have any questions, I can either answer them here, or if you have any follow-ups, please email me. The report is now publicly available. If you can't click on the link, you can use the QR code there to access the report. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Calvin. It's a very interesting piece of modelling work you've done there, and I'm very glad that the report's publicly available. I'm sure that everyone will be keen to look into some of the assumptions you've used. As we heard earlier in the day, it's all about what assumptions you put in. But an interesting conclusion that the license case is the way forwards. I have a suspicion that our next speaker might disagree with you. So in that case, I'll invite up Vagani from Meta, who's going to present the unlicensed view.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. After all right, cool. Yes, so I don't know if the views I'm going to share represent all of the arguments for really opening up the ban for unlicensed use, but what I'll try to highlight with my presentation is just to highlight the importance of Wi-Fi 6E and the 6 gigahertz band to the future of the internet. Meta is a technology company. And really, when it comes to different types of technologies to connect people, we are very agnostic. So we don't prefer one technology over the other. But when it comes to the 6 gigahertz band, we do believe that the most valuable way to leverage that band and connect people to the internet and derive value from that band is Wi-Fi. And not only because of the connectivity advantages of Wi-Fi and how we can use that to connect people. It's also about the future of the internet. And for us, the future of the internet, where we're seeing the technology evolve towards, or the internet evolve towards, is the metaverse. I don't have time, or I would have done a quick Q&A and asked anyone in the room if they've heard about the metaverse. Have you heard about the metaverse? Have you not heard about the metaverse? So it's a strange one because people haven't heard or have heard and no one is indicating. So, but anyway, the metaverse is, in our view, the next iteration of the internet, and it's important that Africa really puts in place the right spectrum policy, especially opening up the 6 gigahertz band to enable us leverage all of the economic opportunity that will come from the metaverse. So what is the metaverse? Imagine you are a doctor and you rather than practicing on cadavers, you can enter a virtual environment and practice your surgical skills. Imagine how that could improve the medical outcomes of Africans. So imagine you're in school and you're learning about the important historical events that happened in Africa, and rather than you reading from a book, you're able to go into this virtual environment and really experience what the people that were fighting for our independence, fighting against apartheid, for instance, how they did or what they did. Imagine our architects, our creators, our musicians, creating environments where they can collaborate or showcase our culture. Imagine how that would really transform our lives. So there's a lot that the metaverse will deliver. And we haven't even scratched the surface. And the way we see the metaverse at Meta, we see this to be a set of digital spaces which will really include or consist of immersive 3D experiences. And the way we're thinking about the metaverse is that today when you navigate or you leverage the internet, it's mostly through 2D surfaces. But with the metaverse, it will be mostly 3D experiences. It will feel like you're inside the internet rather than looking at it through a screen. A number of technologies will bring the metaverse to life, whether it's augmented reality or virtual reality. If we look at the next slide, it's important to highlight this evolution of technology. I don't know if we have people old enough in the room to have used mainframe computing. When I look at this room, I see a lot of young people. I don't think anyone used those large computers that were housed in buildings. But that was what we had 5 decades ago. Then we saw the evolution to personal computing, where we had personal computers in our offices, in our homes, and we could only connect to the internet through a dial-up connection when we're at home or at work. Then the mobile internet came, it revolutionized our lives, transformed our lives. Now we could connect anywhere, work from anywhere, connect to our family and friends anywhere. Right now, I'm sure as I'm speaking, some people are reading emails and texting loved ones. The internet became faster, we added video, it became richer. And where we see this journey going is this 3D spatial computing, the metaverse, this immersive internet. And for that to work, we require Wi-Fi 6E. And the reason why we require Wi-Fi 6E is because for you to really benefit from those immersive experiences, a lot of VR rendering, a lot of rendering would take place, and that rendering requires high bandwidth and low latency connectivity. And this, when we look at the different connectivity technologies out there, Wi-Fi 6E is the technology that allows such VR rendering, such immersive experiences. Without such connectivity, without opening up the band and and really ensuring that our builders, our innovators can start building for the metaverse and reap that economic opportunity that will come from it. We're limiting ourselves in Africa. When you think about the economic opportunity, this is just a study by the analysis group that estimates that the metaverse would contribute about 40 billion USD in GDP to Africa within 10 years. So it's a huge economic opportunity. But for us to harness or leverage or tap into that economic opportunity, we need to open up the 6 gigahertz band and allow Wi-Fi 6E to be deployed across Africa. I think this slide is very important because, yeah, it shows how governments across the world have actually started putting in place enabling frameworks that would empower them to harness all of this economic opportunity that will come from the metaverse. Here we have Dubai. They've published their national metaverse strategy, and they estimate the metaverse would contribute or create about 40,000 jobs to the Dubai economy, which is an equivalent of about $4 billion. $4 billion within 5 years of implementation of this metaverse national strategy by Dubai. So this is to show that countries are actually taking or putting in place the right frameworks for them to empower themselves or their people to harness all of this economic opportunity. One of those key building blocks is spectrum, 6 gigahertz, Wi-Fi 6E. What are we doing in Africa to ensure that not only countries like Dubai and the West benefit from the metaverse, but our African creators, innovators, builders actually benefit from the metaverse? But it's not just about the metaverse, it's also about ensuring that we do not see the creation of a digital divide even within our countries. We're talking about 5G and all of the applications that will run on 5G because of those high speeds. But what about rural areas? Would we be able to roll out 5G to the rural areas? Most probably not. And what we'll still need is high-speed connectivity delivered by satellite. And that is where Wi-Fi 6E is also important for connecting people in the most remote or unconnected areas, because the satellite industry can actually coexist with Wi-Fi, can leverage Wi-Fi to deliver very high-speed connectivity to rural areas. And this is important if we want to ensure that even our people, our brothers and sisters in the rural areas benefit from high-speed connectivity. But it's clear, like we've already had discussions throughout today where we've had different proponents highlight the importance of the different technologies and or the importance of designating IMT within the upper 6 gigahertz band or opening up the band to Wi-Fi. What is clear, at least from the technical studies, is that a lot of our nations in Africa use fixed services and fixed satellite services to deliver connectivity to people. And it is from all the technical studies that have taken place, it is not clear that IMT can actually coexist without harmful interference with the incumbent services that are already in that band. So why take the risk of opening up that band or designating that IMT within that band, especially as right now there is no business case or clear business case or equipment that shows that for the IMT equipment that can be deployed within that band, the earliest time is within 5 to 10 years. Why not allow a no change, which actually guarantees no harmful interference with the incumbent services? Why not adopt that position for WRC 23, a no change, which allows you to protect those incumbent services? And for those countries that are really determined to deploy IMT within that band, they can still deploy that as within nationally, it's their right, but also gives the freedom to other countries that are keen to leverage all of that economic opportunity from the metaverse and from the Wi-Fi connectivity by opening up the band to Wi-Fi. So and that's why for us, we would want to say We recommend that administrations actually adopt a no change method for the WRC23 for the upper band. And like we've said, the ATU, through recommendation 005, has already provided recommendations on how to open up the lower part of the band. And there's nothing stopping us today from opening up that lower part of the band to Wi-Fi while taking a no change for the upper part of the band. I'll end my presentation with a video that highlights what the metaverse, how the metaverse could transform different sectors, different industries. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share these views with you. So if we could play the video.
I'm the head of education here at Johnson & Johnson Institute, and our responsibility is to train surgeons all around the world. Today, we have a real problem that on a global basis, there's not enough access to safe healthcare because we don't have enough surgeons trained. VR tools like Oculus can help us solve this global crisis.
With Oculus and VR, it's allowed us to really shrink the time in which we can put somebody into an experience. We can now immerse them into hundreds of different actual life scenarios. So from day one, they're providing much more empathy to our customer. And so at the end of the day, it's allowing us to provide a better experience.
At DHL Express, we ship around 5 million shipments a week. And to do that, we have to build what we call unit load devices. And this is where VR is invaluable. We can send people into an immersive world and they can be safe and they can go through the process of building this unit load device. And that's where VR really works for us as a business.
So the potential for AR, VR in our company comes back to our core business, which is meeting the world's energy needs with highly complex operations. Fundamentally, the most important commitment ExxonMobil has is to operate our facilities safely and reliably around the world. This technology helps us ensure we deliver on that commitment.
In our industry, our operators are exposed to daily tasks that are extremely high risk. With VR, we can get them prepared and trained for those tasks. If that helps us save lives, it's paid for itself.
So at Tailspin, the whole point of starting the company was to take advantage of what's possible in VR and how that was going to change the workforce. For us, Oculus is part of our origin story.
We were lucky enough to collaborate with Tailspin and really be the first in insurance that we're aware of to use this kind of technology.
The biggest barrier to proper use of simulation within healthcare is not one of realism and fidelity, it's one of access. It is an incredibly powerful technology that will affect us from Los Angeles to New York to Western Africa to Southeast Asia.
I actually think Oculus and virtual reality is going to be the way that we train many, many parts of our healthcare systems around the world.
Oculus enables DHL Express to scale up any implementation around the world that we've never been able to do before.
Standalone headset, because the total cost of ownership is less, allows us to touch a lot more people. We can move it around, we can get to more people, and in the end, impact a lot more of our employee workforce using this technology and the power of it.
And it's critical that we have partners like Oculus to create that wonderful platform where we can then deliver our virtual reality content to anybody, anywhere, and at any time.
Also, after the video, it seems we're not impressed by the metaverse and all of the ways it's going to transform our lives. But I think a final word from me is let's put in place the right spectrum policy to enable our innovators, our creators to build the next big platforms and really harness all of that economic opportunity from the metaverse. Without this Wi-Fi 6E, without Wi-Fi deployment in the 6 gigahertz band, they will not be able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fagani. That was an inspirational end to the presentation there, and a clear statement of the possibilities that we could get from this metaverse vision of the future. Now, in order to debate this topic, I'd like to invite up our panel. While they're coming up to the stage, I'll just introduce them. So I'm going to be joined by Dick Sono from the Department of Telecom and Postal Services here in South Africa, Athag Nonsu from RCEP in Banan, Cesar Gutierrez Migueles from Huawei, and Mortimer Hope from the consultancy Policy Impact Partners. Now, the way we're going to work this is I'll give each of our panelists 3 minutes, no more than that, because we'll run out of time otherwise. 3 minutes for some introductory remarks, and then we'll dive straight into the debate. If you have questions, we'll take those from the floor at that point. So, Dick, if I invite you up first to give a policy perspective on this.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then afternoon, colleagues. In South Africa, we call this last session the gravy session. It's like a night shift. So, and it's I think giving me the opportunity to speak to this upper band before allocations are made, and that I have to speak to the licensing. It makes it difficult. However, we are, from a South African point of view, in a process to review our spectrum policy. Now, this particular policy, it looks at also ensuring that emerging technologies and innovation that can add value and improve the lives of South Africans are taken into consideration. Now, as we prepare ourselves for the conference, we are going to be faced with a difficult decision, because we having different views, conflicting and very confusing views that we have to deal with from a policy point of view. We are having spectrum, the satellite colleagues who are saying sharing is not feasible within this particular band. We need to protect FSS. We are having the mobile guys who are saying sharing it's feasible. I mean, if you look at the recent concluded 5D working party, there were 14 studies who were saying sharing is possible, 4 who were saying sharing is not possible. So you have to, as a policymaker, deal with this type of conflicting views and make a right decision for your beneficiaries. And beneficiaries in this case, I'm talking about ordinary South Africans who has to benefit from the use of the spectrum resource. So we'll need to look at what is best, in the best interest of the South Africans, especially those that are in the rural and remote areas of the Republic. Now, and I said to people as I was receiving information, because I said to ask IMT guys and satellite guys and Wi-Fi guys to give me their views, I got to be confused. Hence, you don't even see me putting a presentation, because the information that I was getting, it was just making me lose my mind. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to make any policy statements in terms of what we're going to support, because studies have been concluded. There are methods out there. I think Fagani had reflected that. So we'll look into that and do what is best for South Africa. And as we go to SADC and Africa, I think we will do what is best for Africans at large and for the benefit of Africa. The decisions that we need to make will be impacted by the economies of scale in terms of whichever device and innovation that is there, to ensure that Africa as a continent benefits for all Africans. Thank you.
Thank you. Some interesting points there. I mean, particularly given how early we are in this debate, it is a little overwhelming with all the perspectives, and these dividing lines seem to have been drawn pretty tightly already, which does cause difficulties when it comes to the regulators and the implementation of these issues. So I thought maybe I ask you to speak next.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, distinguished delegate. I just want to make some presentation according regulatory framework and licensee exemption for Wi-Fi 6 band. Okay. So a minute. Okay. I don't have many time. I don't just pass this agenda who concern 10 points. Special one is the overview for Wi-Fi 6 GHz, who is the last standard of Wi-Fi Alliance, that is on the 82.11 AX protocol. And in this case, we show that we need to improve Wi-Fi performance for multiplicity of devices, provision for large bandwidth, which required by the use of application, and easy deployment, which are ability to operate without a license using automatic channel selection and power control. So in this case, it's important to have additional harmonized resource that we need the 6 gigabands. So all of them here know that we experiment the limit of Wi-Fi 5, and all these limits are lifted with Wi-Fi 6. What is the benefit of Wi-Fi 6 for our country? It is first the higher speed, up to 9.6 gigabit, a stable network, even with many devices active simultaneously. A longer battery for IoT service, which we will make and establish it on our country. So, the use case for Wi-Fi 6, which is very beneficial for us, is exchanges mobile broadband, massive scale IoT, and mission critical services. In case of regulatory framework, we have ITU provision, and we have resolution 229, which use some frequency band to local area network. We have again ATU recommendation 005. This is adopted in July 2021, which recommended some technical condition for usage of Wi-Fi 6. So, for our country, Republic of Benin, we have footnote, special footnote, which is band 001, according to short-range device radio communication. And in this case, we have identified some band of frequency to use local area network and broadband wireless access. So, for the second part of band, and according to presentation made by Dr. Abdul Rahman, he made me comfortable and resume our view for 6 giga. We expect and we agree for the preliminary support identification of the part of 6 giga upper to IMT. For our population, we agree that the case of enabling license exempt access to Wi-Fi 6 giga in the future will be complementary, without friction and without user notices it. So, the case of for enabling license exempt access to the 6 gigahertz band is, first of all, economic value of Wi-Fi. The value of Wi-Fi to economy and society is expected to rise, and next generation product and development are introduced. If you deliver global value for 1.70 trillion in 2018, we hope that it will complete 4G and 5G network and support for innovation. So all are again take part of resilience of recovery of COVID-19 pandemic, who gave us a chance to improve our technology and Wi-Fi users. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. A really great summary there of the view from Benin, as well as the rationale for a wider use of the 6 gigahertz band for the unlicensed case. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
So Cesar, perhaps I could ask you to say a few words next, as few as you would like in the interest of time.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. So the first thing I would say is that I'm speaking on behalf of Ericsson, Nokia, and Huawei. So our three companies are very aligned on this topic. We're aligned in most of the spectrum topics, but in this in particular, we're very aligned. So the 6 gigahertz band, it's a very important band for mobile. It will be the extension band for 5G. It will be used for mobile broadband and for fixed wireless access. This has been mentioned this morning, but mobile networks are the main means of connectivity in Africa. That is for voice and for data. That's in urban areas, suburban areas, and in rural areas. And mobile networks are increasingly being used for fixed wireless access as well. Franklin spoke about this earlier this morning. So what we think is that we are going to need more capacity for mobile networks in the midterm. And we think that this band, the 6 gigahertz band, is ideal for that. It's a large band. We are looking at the upper part of the band, which is 700 megahertz. So that would allow 100 or 200 megahertz per operator in most countries. It's a band that has good propagation conditions. They're very similar to the C band. Not exactly the same. The conditions are slightly worse, but we can overcome that with advanced antennas. So we would be able to reuse existing C-band sites, something that is very important for mobile operators. Again, Franklin mentioned this early on. And the other point about this band is the IMT identification process that is underway. So for us, IMT identification is a way for governments, for countries to signal to industry an intention to use the band in a certain way. And that gives us a very good signal in terms of harmonization, which will drive economies of scale and the ecosystem. In addition, the IoT identification brings the process of at the ITU, where the coexistence with existing services is going to be looked in detail. So that is why IoT identification is very important for us, and generally speaking for introducing IMT. We do recognize that this band is a band of interest for other services, for satellite services first, and then for unlicensed use. Satellite services, this is the uplink of the C-band. The block that we are looking at, the upper part of the 6 gigahertz, is the uplink of the extended C-band and of the Appendix 30B. So these bands have relatively low number of satellites operating. The majority of satellites operating C-band use the standard C-band. So that's one thing. But then there is the aspect of the coexistence. And of course, the fact that there are few satellites does not mean that they should not be protected. And ITU has been looked at that in very much detail. Many studies. The majority of the studies show that coexistence is possible. Some of them show that it's not possible. The difference is in the assumptions that people are making, and different assumptions lead to different results. Now, in our view, when doing these studies, the assumptions must be reasonable and realistic. For instance, the number of mobile base stations that are modeled should be realistic. The models for the antenna patterns must correspond to real antennas. This band is unlikely to be used in rural areas. So if you're going to model deployments in rural areas, those should be very limited. If we use realistic and reasonable assumptions, we get results that show that coexistence is possible. Now, with regards to the unlicensed use, yes, we do recognize that many countries have, a number of countries have allocated the band for unlicensed use, notably in the US, where they have allocated the whole band, the 1200 megahertz of it, for unlicensed use. In Europe, they have decided to allocate the lower part of the band. We do have the ATU recommendation that also recommends the lower part of the band. In our view, there isn't really a need for more Wi-Fi capacity in Africa, and that is fundamentally because Wi-Fi, the main use of Wi-Fi is for connecting to the broadband to the broadband in the homes. The broadband speeds in most of the continent are relatively low. Penetration is also relatively low. So there isn't really a need for additional Wi-Fi capacity. The existing Wi-Fi bands, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, provide enough capacity. Farghani presented the case of virtual reality, where you have a headset and that is connected to a machine, a computer in the room. We do not think that this band is appropriate for that. There is WiGig, which operates in 60 gigahertz and which was designed precisely for this kind of use. Very short distances, very large throughput. That is, in our view, the technology and the band that should be used for that kind of application. So we do not think that there is the need for additional Wi-Fi capacity. Now, we recognize that there are views among regulators that support additional Wi-Fi spectrum. So in our view, on our suggestion, and our proposal is that there should be a balanced approach to this band. One where the lower part is allocated to Wi-Fi in line with the ATU recommendation, and one where the upper part, above 6.4 to 5 gigahertz, is identified for IMT. And Mr. Abdurrahman reminded us of this morning. It was the African countries that made the proposal to consider this band for IMT in 2019. We think that the premise that was presented at that time, which was that this band would be well suited to the conditions in Africa, that premise remains today. So our suggestion would be that African countries continue to support that IMT identification.
Okay,
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yes, let's do that. There's a very clear statement there of the case for a balanced approach in the band, and the top part of the band being allocated to the IMT. So to conclude the introductory remarks, Mortimer, I think you had one slide you wanted to talk through.
Yes. So my job is a bit more difficult because the previous speakers have stolen my thunder. So I'm going to focus on one area that the others, I think, haven't paid sufficient attention to, and that is affordability. If we look, first, if you're going to solve an issue, you need to first understand what is the problem and why we have that problem before you propose solutions. So we think the problem is that internet usage in Africa is low. And this is supported by the ITU statistics, which show that in 2021, there were just about 30% of Africans who are using the internet. At the same period, we had about 80% of Africans who were within the coverage network of mobile broadband networks. We must congratulate the mobile industry for doing a good job in taking broadband to the people, because if we were depending on the fixed network, well, we all know that's less than 10% of the population that will have access to fixed broadband. So mobile has done a good job, taken broadband to over 80% of the African population. But only 30% of the population is using the internet. So we have a usage gap of about 50% of the population. Now, why is that so? Our thoughts of it is that it's because the devices, first of all, and secondly, the mobile data prices are too high. People cannot afford it. And again, this is supported by the ITU's report from 2021. And let me quote the exact report. Yes, it's on the screen, I think, at the bottom. It's the ITU report on prices, broadband prices. And it shows that in Africa in 2021, the average price of a low usage broadband package was 7% of GNI, gross national income. This is the highest in the world. The world average is 2%, and which is also the Broadband Commission target. 2% of GNI should be spent on a data package, data communication package, but we are at 7%. So we have evidence that our prices are high and we have a large usage gap where about 50% of the population lives within the coverage area of a mobile broadband network but are not using it. Now, if we continue rolling out networks, and I think we still need to do that to cover the other 19 or 20% of the population that are uncovered, we still need to provide coverage for them. And that coverage is best provided by low band frequencies, for instance, be 1 gigahertz and below. So that needs to be done. But at the same time, and I think more importantly, we have to get people to use the internet where they already have coverage. And that affordability, how do we make it affordable for people? So we could look at taxes on devices and on the service. We could also look at other methods of reducing the burden on the operators. So we could look at spectrum sharing, for instance. Allow operators to share infrastructure in those areas where it's uneconomical for them all to build networks. So if they're low density areas, instead of having 5 separate networks, maybe we can have 2 or 3, so the operators share the networks. So that's at a network level, but looking further, we could look at the use of the available spectrum. So there needs to be a balance between licensed spectrum, which is what we have used to roll out the networks up to now, the mobile broadband networks, and unlicensed or license-exempt use of the band. And our recommendation is that the 6 gigahertz band should be made license exempt. And I'll give you a personal example. So where I live in a complex, I've got a subscription fiber. It's 500 megabits per second. The people around me, they have different speeds. Some have 1 gig. Others 500, others 300. So from my home, different parts of the home, I can see sometimes 8 or 10 Wi-Fi routers. Now, for us all to be able to use our broadband connections, we need at least 1 channel on the Wi-Fi router to be dedicated to us with no interference from our neighbors. And that 1 channel should be able to provide me the speed that I've subscribed to with my fiber service provider. So it's not the whole, I cannot use the whole channel because I've got I cannot use the whole 500 megahertz, for instance, in the lower 6 gigahertz band, or the 1200 megahertz in the full 6 gigahertz band when it becomes available. But I will just be able to use one or two channels. So that must be able to support whatever speed, whether it's 500 megabits per second or 1 gig. So we've had some arguments that the spectrum that is already made available for Wi-Fi can support the traffic that people need to carry. And spectrum management is about planning for the future, not just for the current use. So we need to be able to provide the Wi-Fi capacity to carry the traffic that we think is coming. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mortimer. Okay, well, thank you very much to our panel for those opening remarks. If I could ask everybody who is watching virtually to please submit your questions, and we'll also take some questions from the floor. While we're running around with the microphones, please make yourselves known. I'll start with one question, picking up off that point. It's from consumers' point of view, perhaps the service that the experience, the metaverse, or whether something else is delivered over may be less important. So how can policy goals perhaps address the connectivity that consumers need on a service neutral basis? Does anybody want to add any thoughts on that one? Policymakers first.
I think it's we strive to, as we develop our policies, to ensure that they are, of course, supported by regulation. That when we license the spectrum, it must be on a technology neutrality basis, meaning that technology and neutral, service agnostic, to allow whoever that has the spectrum to deploy the type of technology that they wish to deploy. However, as policymakers, at some point, we need to drive what is in the best interest of our people. I mean, if I were to take 2G and 3G today, and country to country, in South Africa, is it still relevant for our people, as in ordinary citizens? Probably not. But if you look at the machine to machine and IoT, it is still relevant. You know, you'll have banks wanting to offer or to be offered this particular service. So it becomes one of those where if you have to ask the operators to directly switch, they need to think about that. But if you want to move your people and so such that they don't find themselves left behind, using what we call inferior technology, the service neutrality and your technology neutrality, you deal with it in a nice way in the policy and say you need to switch off this technology. So it depends on how you look at it. Do we give it at the beginning and say technology neutral and service agnostic? Yes, we do that, but we look at time. Time is of essence in this case, and we make such difficult decisions. But I think that's the approach that we look at. Don't ask me that again.
A well-balanced view. So, do you want to say anything, or should we go to questions?
So, from our perspective, yes, for licensed spectrum license for IoT, technology neutrality is very important. We think that operators know when they have to migrate to 4G or 5G. In certain cases, yes, perhaps they may need a bit of a push, but generally we think that they know when it's time. In terms of service neutrality, definitely licenses should be service neutral, and by that I mean that should be operators should be allowed to use the spectrum for mobile and for fixed, and they are doing that, and that is very efficient. They know when it's the time to introduce fixed, and they know when is the time to introduce, for instance, 5G mobile. So Franklin mentioned this earlier, starting with fixed, and when the terminals are there, when the demand is there, you can start introducing mobile. So that freedom or that ability for the operators to decide that for us is very important. So for licensed spectrum, yes, we definitely, absolutely always support neutrality.
Okay, thank you. So if we go to question from the floor then.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists for wonderful comments and presentations. Something has been, well, first let me even start saying that this band, I want to remind everybody, it's an African baby. It's an African baby, we put it on the table. Let's not forget that. So if we want to really throw this baby away, we must really think hard, and we have to really convince us that it's the right thing to do, because it came from us. Now, the next question would be, Wi-Fi, we use it mostly like this kind of setting, in a house or in a home or in an office or in public space like this. Isn't it possible to better use higher bands, millimeter wave, an upper part, and leave this one that we can use cheaper for our people, instead of focusing on it? Since you already is assumed that you have fiber to a particular location before you can get the whole benefit of 1200 bandwidth that you are asking for. And if you already have the fiber, why don't you use millimeter wave? That's number one. Now, the second question is, in the existing situation where the biggest arm, when I say arm, I'm talking about the backhaul. I'm using this as my hand. This is the backhaul. The biggest capacity we have so far is about 40 meg. How do you intend to backhaul all the content of 1200 meg in that same arm? I mean, if you don't have fiber, we don't have fiber in most of our places. It's a very small portion of places that we have fiber. And by the time you already have fiber, nothing stops you from using millimeter wave anyway. Now, another question is, let's not forget, we today have Wi-Fi on the 2.4 gig, which is about 84 meg, probably 90, I can't remember off the top of my head, but about between 84 and 90. If you add on the 500 meg, is another 150, 234 altogether. Now you are saying, take from 5925 all the way to 6425. That's complete 500 meg. 200%. 200%, more than 200% in fact. Are you saying that we can't deliver any of these things that we're seeing, augmented reality or virtual reality? Is that the answer? We cannot deliver with 500 meg? I need to have clarity on that.
Okay. So thank you very much for these questions.
I'll stop here.
We've got a long enough list already, so we'll tackle some of those, I think. Perhaps we could start with the point about using different bands to provide Wi-Fi services. Why not perhaps use the higher bandwidths? Mortimer or Arthur, did you want to maybe start on that?
Yes, so I'd like to flip the question. Why doesn't the mobile industry use all the spectrum that is currently assigned to and allocated and assigned to them? We have, right in South Africa, I'll give examples. We have some operators that are masquerading as network operators. They don't have any network. They have the spectrum, but they don't have networks. They've leased it out to other operators, to the larger operators. Now we want to give them more spectrum so that they can sell it back. Those funds should be going to the fiscus, not to them. So let's call a spade a spade. We have a situation where operators, they get the spectrum, they keep asking for more, get it, and don't use it. So thanks, as boss said.
That doesn't answer the question.
So I can see we're going for the controversial questions on this panel then.
But I just want to add
Please.
something. It is important for regulator to make policy to satisfy the increasing demand. It is very important. If you don't satisfy the demand, we can't do anything. That is very important for us. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Cesar, did you want to come back on any of those points before we go to another question?
I lost track of Bashir's question, so I don't know if there was any address particularly to mobile vendor. I don't think there was.
No.
Okay. One of the questions down here.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Iman Muhyiddin from Nokia. I would like just to say thanks to Cesar for presenting.
I can't hear.
Okay. So thanks for Cesar for presenting on behalf of Nokia, Ericsson, and Huawei. Thank you very much. Let's go back again to the question from Bashir. Wi-Fi or wireless LAN technologies, they are indoor deployment typically. And they have a good coexistence conditions because of their characteristics. Why they are looking for harvesting outdoor spectrums, which could be used economically, in an economical way, in a valuable way to support the 5G systems and 5G advances. They can look at their deployment. The deployment are indoor deployment, where 6 gigahertz, as Cesar said, have a comparable result as a C-band, which is an outdoor deployment. So we need to find an answer. Why is this? Before we go back and say that why we don't have, we are not using all the spectrum we have. The second thing which I have is a remark and observation. From a Nokia, we have tested, I wouldn't say tested, I would say we have simulated 5G network and a Wi-Fi network in an ideal condition. Ideal condition means that there is no interference. We have noticed that the spectral efficiency from a Wi-Fi is 3 times higher. I mean, the 5G use 100 megahertz, and when we have to compare it with a Wi-Fi, it was using 320 megahertz to reach the same capacity. So there is an inefficiency in using of the resources. Maybe we have to reconsider those aspects as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Does anyone want to come back on some of that? Mortimer?
Yes, thanks. So I'd like to go back to my slide where we looked at affordability and the usage gap. So yes, we can have this nice 5G network and no one is using it, or just 40% of the people within the coverage area are using it. Is that what we want? We want most of the people to be using the internet. So we have to look at affordability. Mobile has done a great job of building out the network, but unfortunately, it's not very affordable for the majority of people. And I think that's what we need to focus on. In addition to the coverage, the 6 gigahertz band is not going to provide additional coverage that you cannot get with the 700, 800, and 900 megahertz band spectrum that you already have.
Perhaps one question, follow-up question on that one then. I guess the point is, in terms of network architectures and the affordability with mobile, the backhaul challenge is a big one. and you have to often go to fiber, we heard earlier today, for 5G. The penetration, as we saw from Calvin's presentation, of fixed networks in some of these sub-Saharan African countries is more limited. Does the need to build out the backbone, the fiber backbone for Wi-Fi services, mean that we need to think carefully about the affordability of that option as well, perhaps? Cesar?
So I think certainly there is the need to build the the fiber backbone, and that is for servicing directly service to the homes, or for the backbone for mobile networks. That there's no doubt about that. That the fiber needs to grow, and it is growing. Now, for backhauling 5G, if you don't have fiber, you can use microwave, and a colleague from Nokia mentioned this earlier. So you can use the E-band, which many countries have already opened for microwave, and that band provides you with sufficient capacity to backhaul 5G sites, no problem with that. So you don't need to have fiber to the base station. If you have it, it's much better, cheaper, simpler, but you can have microwave to the base station. You can backhaul that way. I wanted to come back to the point of affordability raised by Mortimer. I think in a way you are kind of preempting the discussion tomorrow about connecting the unconnected. Yes, there is a coverage gap. There are many gaps. There is affordability gap. There is electric power gap. Not everybody has electricity. There is literacy gap. There is content gap. Perhaps the content that's available is not the one that people would like to look at. So there are many gaps. Now, when it comes to coverage and when it comes to connectivity, yes, the affordability of handsets is important, but I think that's a problem that would affect Wi-Fi 6 as much as mobile. Presumably, people would use their phones when connecting to Wi-Fi 6. So yes, definitely there's a problem with affordability of handsets, and I think it's certainly improving. We are seeing handsets, 4G handsets at relatively low prices, but that's a problem for everybody. It's not just mobile networks. Wi-Fi networks will have the same problem. So yes, affordability is important, but I don't think it's relevant to the discussion about what to do with the 6 GHz band. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And we should definitely remember the incumbent users of these bands as well. So perhaps one more question.
Sure. Thank you. Hazem Wakit from Intelsat. So I'm actually asking a couple of questions about this, less so about satellites. But so 2 things. First, it seems that the use cases of Wi-Fi, 5G, 6G are getting closer. Which is almost that both sides are competing for the same customer, so to speak. I mean, they talk about metaverse, So both sides are talking about metaverse. You talk to the 6G folks, they tell you metaverse. You talk to the Wi-Fi folks, they say metaverse. So it's almost we have two technologies competing for the same thing, and you see it converging. So the question for the mobile people is that when would you consider Wi-Fi as an offload technology? Because it happens all the time, right? So you offload from mobile to Wi-Fi. Why not consider that, right? The other question, which is kind of maybe a rhetorical question, how about some sharing studies between 5G, between mobile and Wi-Fi? We talk all the time about sharing studies. Has the industry considered conducting sharing studies between Wi-Fi and mobile? Can they coexist in the same domain? Or is it another case of a zero-sum situation where one moves in, the other moves out? Thank you.
Thank you. So 2 questions there. The first on the nature of the services that are really driving the demand for the spectrum, and secondly on the nature of what sharing could be done, perhaps. So who wants to start with that?
I will take it if nobody takes it. Okay, so let me address the last one first. So sharing of mobile and Wi-Fi. Yes, there have been studies and they cannot share. Wi-Fi is a technology that works on a listen before transmit basis. And mobile is technology that works on the assumption that it has dedicated spectrum. You cannot put the 2 together. Wi-Fi would listen, will realize that there is a base station transmitting and will not take the channel. In certain situations, perhaps yes, but as a basis, as a baseline, that will not happen. So no, they cannot coexist in the same channel. I think that the issue of offloading and the services, I think yes, there is a lot of talk about Wi-Fi offloading, but again, going back to the conditions here in the continent, our understanding is that it's more of a case of onloading, people using a mobile connection to provide Wi-Fi through a personal hotspot. So the situation we have is that fixed connectivity is not that prevalent. So there are not so many access points with good capacity. So there is no Wi-Fi offloading. As I said, most people will normally use mobile for connectivity, and there is this onloading scenario where yes, people would actually here we can see that where we would activate the mobile the terminals as personal hotspots and use that to connect Wi-Fi devices.
Thank you. Any more comments? Yeah, Arthur first, perhaps then.
He's asking if you have any.
Any further comments on that question?
No, it is okay.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm looking at the time and I'm conscious that there are some drinks to be had in a few minutes. So I think we'll call the panel session there. Thank you all very much for your insights, for the discussion we've had. And I hope we'll all be able to talk about it some more over a drink in a few minutes. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Thanks.
So thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you, of course, to Jonathan as well for moderating that session. And yeah, another really, really interesting discussion, and one that I'm sure is set to continue over the course of the next few months. So that's pretty much it for day one. But before we go, we do have one last presentation or last contribution. So as I mentioned, the cocktails that are going to be taking place in just about 5 minutes or so are very kindly being provided for us by Broadcast Networks Europe. So Broadcast Network Europe have, I think, hosted cocktail receptions at a number of events here in the Middle East and also in Europe that we've done. So I think they're quite quickly becoming a very popular organization around delegates at the events. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Joe Franz, who's going to say a few words and then welcome us all to join him for the cocktail reception. So Joe, over to you.
Thank you so much. This morning, I think somebody said that he was standing between the minister and the rest of us. The minister was now standing between lunch and the rest of us. Now I'm standing between yourselves and something to clear your throats with. So I will be brief. Broadcast Network Europe is happy to present, to offer a cocktail. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you all of you at the entire Forum Global team for the opportunity for us to be part of this. We are very glad. Broadcast Networks Europe represents Europe's terrestrial network operators and managers of the infrastructure that brings you compelling TV and radio and other users. And we are a trade organization that really are working for stable regulatory environment. So without much further ado, Bashi, my good friend there, has taught me one lesson. If you want to cook a frog, cook it very slowly. Otherwise, it will jump out of the pot. He told me this. So I'll be very brief and very slow at it. Welcome to the cocktail. Have a drink and enjoy yourselves. It's lovely to be together once again, seeing each other in person, taking a drink, sharing experiences, and also talking about things that we share in common and things that we can explore. I'm happy we are discussing issues about affordability, but also penetration, and certainly issues of long-term investments that we all need to make our businesses viable. And that's why we are here. So let's explore the opportunities and let us have a drink together and share more ideas. Most welcome. And by the way, some of you may be wondering why I have this. I was trying to shave this morning, as I always do, and I was too happy to be here. So we'll give it a few days and it will dry up. Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Joe. And during the cocktail reception, if you see Joe, come and say hello to him and thank him for the drinks that we're about to have. So as I said, that finishes things for today. We start tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So the cocktail receptions, though, is going to be taking place just down one floor. So if you head out of here, turn left, go down the escalator, and then you'll see at the bottom of the stairs colleagues showing you where the cocktail reception is going to be. So thank you all so much for your participation today. Look forward to sharing a few drinks with you all now. Thank you all so much.